Welcome back to the E-Talking podcast. My name's Stuart Garlick. I'm from eMotion Formula E, and I've got two very special guests here today. The topics we'll be discussing: Evans above. Will Mitch Evans win, keep him at Jaguar, and will this be the first of many for the team? Boys getting too thick. Are the Formula E cars still the right shape and size for the tracks they're racing on, or do we need to think about changing the formula a bit? And plenty more as well, including, whoa, let's whinge together because all of the Group 1 drivers decided to get together and complain in interviews about being in Group 1 for qualifying. Does it matter? Should we listen to them? And does the fact that it's not just Lucas de Grassi moaning mean anything? We will discuss that and plenty more on the podcast. So, welcome guys. Sophie Barker and Conrad O'Keefe. Sophie writes for Formula E Zone and her own blog, and Conrad, you write for eracing.net, is that correct?
That is.
Okay, and so guys, what did you think of the race generally yesterday? Your general thoughts?
Of the Formula E race, I think it's one of the most exciting that we've had definitely this season, and it reminded me of the same element of quality that was present in season 4 as well. Some of the drama and close racing, it was definitely interesting, and the part I particularly loved was the attack mode usage near the end between Lotterer and Evans, because that added some real drama, and I think that's the best showcasing of attack mode we've probably seen yet.
Yeah, Sophie, do you think that drivers have finally got used to using attack mode and are getting better at it? And what did you think of the race generally as well?
In a way, I do think the drivers are getting more used to the attack mode. I think maybe a few of them are still struggling a little bit to hit the right sensors and things to make sure they are actually activating it. But all in all, I think it's been a pretty big success for the series. But in terms of the race, I thought it was really exciting. It was just as chaotic as every other Formula E race. You know, the tactical element with the attack mode really added just sort of an extra dimension of chaos to it.
Yeah, I mean, it was the kind of race where, I mean, if it was a bit longer and you said it was a Formula 1 race, then it might have been sold as such. I know I said that for Sanya as well, but there wasn't heart-stopping action every lap, but what there was this kind of looming tension, and I just loved the last 20 laps or so when Lotterer was chasing down Evans to in the end no effect, but it was probably the most suspenseful moment I've seen this season happening.
I feel like the drivers have generally been like this quite a lot throughout Formula E, and the Gen 2 cars, although it has certainly caused some issues, I do think it's more on the side of getting used to the Gen 2 car. One thing I have noticed during the racing is some of the contact that is made and some of the moves that they feel confident enough to pull off, even so much as looking at a Formula 1 car in a certain way could probably break the front wing in half. Yeah, in races like Hong Kong in the first lap, I've seen so much bravery and so much jostling for position that I just wouldn't see in other racing series. And even though these are, well, not exactly open wheel cars, but similar enough, they have so much bravery. It's almost like DTM in a way, or something similar, that feels like they've got some kind of crash structure around them that makes them feel a lot more comfortable, and they know that the car will hold up.
Yeah,
I think they're making the most of that, especially with the Gen 2 machines.
Yeah, and that was definitely reflected in Evans's deep dive to get past Lotterer. I mean, it was an overtaking manoeuvre that, as I wrote yesterday, it was on the edge of being fair. It was definitely employing a couple of black arts, but there was nothing wrong with it. I mean, and in a sense, it was the kind of manoeuvre you could only do in a car with protected wheel arches, etc., wasn't it?
Yeah, just to jump in, that's a perfect representation of it, and I just think if that move was done in Formula 1, because the cars won't hold up and because we're so not used to seeing it, reaction would have been quite different whether it was fair or not. But given it's Formula E and the fact that both drivers were able to cope with it, live with it, be able to stay in the race, stay competitive,
yeah,
it's definitely a fair move. But in some other racing series, because the cars are so fragile, And as a result, the drivers won't attempt these kind of overtakes anywhere near as often enough, even in tracks like Monaco, that it's seen in a different light. But it was definitely a fair move. It was on the edge, but both drivers were professional in the conduct with it and pulled it off supremely.
Yeah, Sophie, did you feel that Andre Lotterer's reaction after the race showed that, he saw that, as much as he got owned by quite a on the edge manoeuvre, he's dished out plenty of those in his career as well, and that it was actually kind of fair in that way, and it was evening things out.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, he's dished out plenty of those moves. He's had a very long career, so I think it was it was fair. It was firm racing. So yeah, I think he reacted really well to it. Yeah.
What was the thing that surprised you in the race? What was the biggest surprise of the race for you guys?
I was surprised, first of all, by both Venturi's retiring within 2 laps of each other. That was a definite surprise. And also, Stoffel Van Dorn not running into bad luck for a change. He actually managed to keep on the podium and drove a very clean race. And to be honest, I'm really happy about that. Because as we know, throughout Formula One, translating into his first months in Formula E, a lot of bad luck and reliability issues have followed him into the series, and finally he's had a clean weekend where he's been able to hook it up.
Yeah, I mean, Sophie, one thing that I enjoy very much about Formula E is the banter between fans of various drivers. But I mean, if we're bantering, then I'm pretty sure the drivers are bantering as well. And Van Dorn must have been hurt by all those drivers saying, "How many points, by the way, Stoffel?"
I think he can probably take a joke from that. He'll know it's a joke. It's just a bit of good fun and banter between the drivers. It happens in every series, so I don't know if he'd have been hurt by it so much as he'd have probably just laughed it off, because that's the sort of mentality that racing drivers have.
Yeah, which is probably why they're doing Formula E and we're doing a podcast. But hey, we all find our own path in life, don't we? Coming back to Mitch then, great win for Mitch Evans in the Jaguar, and I'd say my surprise was that the Jaguar was actually fast enough to stay ahead of the Techeetah on merit, because it's not been up to now. So have Jaguar found something, or was it just a case of Evans doing well in qualifying and then translating that to the race and the difference not being big enough for him to fall back? Whoever wants to jump in can.
There was an element of luck in qualifying in the fact that he went second to last on an ever-drying track. That definitely favoured it. If he'd have been one of the first to go out, we wouldn't have seen what we'd seen. We'd still have seen definitely a great performance, but it wouldn't be the maiden victory that we've seen today. I doubt that. But during the race, Mitch handled it impeccably, and to be honest, it's not that big a surprise to me. The surprise is more in the Jaguar package, although that wasn't the biggest surprise either, because I do feel like there's more in that Jaguar that's been particularly shown, especially through Nelson, and obviously that's why he's not driving the car now. But yeah, Mitch handled it impeccably because he was so smooth. He attacked when he needed to. Apart from the missing the attack mode point, he managed it impeccably, and it was just such a professional performance from Mitch. People forget that 3 years ago, he was in a junior series. He was having to deal with the fact that the road to F1 was shut down for him. And he's coming to Formula E and he's really making a name for himself in a series that's ever developing. And he's really turned things around. And even at the age of 24, he's professional beyond his years.
So just to come back to that, why was the road to F1 shut down for someone with the obvious quality of Mitch Evans?
I do feel like these days in Formula One, age is a definite limiter. It's very cutthroat, and unless you have a really decent amount of backing, even 21, 22-year-olds can find door to F1 shut if there's a more impressive 18 or 19-year-old driver, like we see with Lando Norris, for example. More and more Formula One teams want people within their academies that have been there from a young age fast-tracked into Formula One, so it can be there for many years and they can grow quicker and develop quicker, and I feel like that has limited Mitch.
Yeah, and this is something that we've only seen recently. I mean, I remember when Hamilton came into the sport. I think he was 23 when he made his debut, which these days would be considered too old, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's be seen as one of the older ones. Sergei Sorokin last year, when he came into Formula One, he was 23, and people were thinking, well, surely he's already had his chance because he'd spent a considerable amount of time in GP2 compared to what we're used to now. And I mean, he was 23 and had a good record behind him, and there were still whispers that he probably wasn't up to it.
Yeah, I mean, without sort of straying off the FE track too much, the one thing that I've been really surprised by with Lando Norris is that he is as fast as he was in Formula 2. I haven't seen the F1 race yet, so he might have done terribly there, but I was so impressed in the previous race in Bahrain because the way he fought Kimi was like a 33-year-old, you know, and I honestly thought that he was someone who was coming in for the marketing because, you know, he's a gamer. He talks like kids. He actually talks like someone on WTF1 or something. But
Yeah.
but then, you know, he turns out those performances, and I just realised, hang on a minute, you know, maybe the future is really young drivers.
That is the way that Formula One teams see it, and to be honest, I think we have Red Bull to thank for that more than any other particular company because they push this drive to get younger and younger drivers in. And where that's Formula E's gain and Formula E's loss, because it's Formula E that gets the Mitch Evans, the Maxi Gumpers. By the way, I hope Maxi Gumper does eventually get a full-time chance in Formula E because I was very impressed by his qualifying performances and believe that he's definitely one to look out for the future. But yeah, it's Formula E's gain to have these 23, 24-year-old drivers who are still young, who don't quite get the opportunities to get into Formula One, but are more than talented to shine in their own right because people like to... It's a stick that's used to beat Formula E with, and it has been since the first season, that Formula E is supposed to be a retirement home that the washed-up drivers go towards. The more and more drivers of this age and of this talent come into Formula E, like Mitch and others, the more this sport's going to be taken seriously, and performances like today can only boost Formula E's recognition.
Yeah, and Sophie, I think what we're seeing as well is that with people like Evans and Mortara as well, you know, we mentioned this in the previous pod with Hazel Southwell and Peter Greaves, but people like that, they when they've spent 3, maybe 4 seasons in Formula E, they do have an advantage over the retired F1 drivers who come in, and I wonder how much of Mitch Evans' success is because he's devoted himself totally to Formula E and he's decided to specialise in that and not go to WEC or do other sports as well. What do you think?
I think, you know, some of it definitely will be. The fact that he has sort of kept himself Formula E based and Formula E only. However, he is a very talented driver, you know, back when he was running in what was GP2, he was, you know, there or thereabouts pretty much all the time. And so I think it is a mixture of natural talent and experience of just staying in Formula E.
Conrad, do you think specialists are always better than drivers who hop in? I think, have we seen this with people like Felipe Nasr who've struggled?
I do believe that people like Felipe Nasr, I mean, he's coming halfway through the season or around a third of the way through. It's a difficult time for him, especially in a car that he's not necessarily at the top. And it's not particularly his fault, but I believe that the more they stick with drivers like Maxi Gunter and get them used to the inner workings of Formula E at a younger age, I do feel that's more beneficial for the series because we need more... I don't know how to say this in the most flattering light, but drivers that are going to be there for 10 years or more. Someone like Felipe Nasr, he's not going to be there for that long. And has other commitments on the side as well, whereas Maxi Gunter is willing to dedicate his time to Formula E. And Formula One has that. That's one of the things that people like about Formula One, the fact that you can get used to a driver, you can start to know them, and you can hope that and reasonably expect that they'll be there for around 12 to 15 years in some cases. And even with drivers like Buemi and Di Grassi, because of when the series came around and what age they were when it did, we're probably not going to see that through them, and it's going to be the next generation of drivers that we do.
I mean, the thing about Evans and Maxi Gunter as well is, unless you watch the junior Formula E carefully, and I'm trying to do that a lot more, just because Hazel and various other people keep going on about Formula 2. So I feel compelled to actually watch what they call the naughty little children before Formula 1 races. Sorry?
You certainly should. It's great.
Yeah. But, I mean, Maxi Gunter I've been so impressed with in the races where he has taken part. And I wonder, is he unfortunate to be in a team like Dragon where they just seem to chop and change all the time? And is there any way that another team could rescue him and just, give him a full season and say, hey, you're not fighting for your job anymore, just do what you need to do? Because one of the things I felt yesterday was that both the Dragon drivers seemed under pressure. They seemed consumed by the red mist. Jose Maria Lopez, not a bad driver. He's won 3 World Touring Car titles, so he should be able to stay at the head of a traffic queue without dropping it in a corner. And yet he did at the end of the first lap. And that kind of mistake, to me, spoke to me as something from a driver who doesn't have full confidence that he'll be around for the full season, so is trying to turn out a performance. I mean, we saw that with Piquet as well when his job was on the line. And I just wonder if the, shall we say, chaotic running of the Dragon team is causing both drivers to make errors.
With the greatest of respect to Dragon Racing, because obviously they're an established Formula E team, yeah, I've noticed that. The drivers always look under pressure. Maxi Gunter was trying to say, I'm taking it one race at a time, but he was the only one that looked anything near calm because he didn't have much to lose. But Jose Maria Lopez is what you'd see as a flagship driver within the series, and even he's under pressure within that team. And it's sad to see because he's definitely more capable than what he showed yesterday. I mean, that really was a shocking performance. There's no other way to put it. Launching some bird into the chicane and then going off and causing that pile up later on in the lap. That's not Formula E standard, and Jose Maria Lopez is much more capable than that. But also with Felipe Nasr, he struggled to settle. He obviously didn't get that testing time that he wanted earlier in the season because of contractual issues, but even so, I don't think that had particularly settled his nerves. He's already experienced teams like Sauber where he's been under pressure because of their financial issues almost every race, and Dragon just seems like something else entirely to him, and it seems like they're a possibly hard team to work with. I could see someone like Gunter being a great addition to one of the teams further down the back, like Nia. Potentially if Tom Dillman was to leave, because, I mean, Oliver Turvey is definitely staying there, I suspect. But yeah, I think that Dragon need to make sure that he's in the car. With greatest respect for Felipe because he's given it a really good go, but Gunter needs to be prioritised because he can turn out to be a mainstay within the series.
Yeah, Sophie, I haven't really spoken about Neo on this podcast, mostly because they've been so far back that I've forgotten about them, but I do have a soft spot for them. I mean, of course they won that Season 1 title with Nelson Piquet, but then I mean, for me, they have one of the crispest, nicest liveries on the grid. That's one thing. And for another thing, they've got Oliver Turvey. They've got Tom Dillman, who seems like a really nice chap. Just seems to me to be the poster boy for a driver who can specialise in Formula E. Of course, they've got Jamie Chadwick as a junior driver as well, which is a big plus in my eyes. But obviously, they're struggling this season. I mean, where does Neo go from here? And obviously they're staying in Formula E because they're trying to dominate the Chinese EV market with their cars. But where does the team go from here? And do they need a driver like Maxi Gunter to come in and push the car beyond its capabilities, if you like?
Oh, 100%. They really do need someone like Maxi Gunter, and I think in the politest of ways, I don't think Dillman is the right person to be pushing and developing that car further. I think you do need someone like Maxi Gunther, give him a good, stable team rather than the chaos that seems to be Dragon. But they just need, maybe someone a little bit more like Maxi, who is a little bit more capable of pushing the car than maybe Dillman is, because obviously, like we've said, Tevi isn't going anywhere.
Conrad, I mean, Neo have fallen right back since their Season 1 days. Is that just a question of other manufacturers coming in with more money and better quality, or is there something deeper in that team failing to perform right now?
Manufacturers coming in is definitely part of it, because we've seen an influx of new manufacturers coming in, and also manufacturer involvement that was there from Season 1 ramping up, obviously, with Audi and BMW, they're growing importance in the series over the years. But also Neo do have to look inside at themselves, because with Season 1, they were a well-oiled team that were able to take their chances. They were like the Formula E equivalent of a good counter-attacking football team. They don't necessarily have all the chances in the world to be able to score the highest points, but every time they did, they nailed it. And every time there seems to be something on offer with Neo, because you can have certain points on offer in Formula E at basically all times. That's an offshoot of how competitive it is. Neo just don't seem to be there. Even with a driver as skilled as Oliver Turvey, I don't feel like Tom Dillman is necessarily pushing him enough, and I honestly wouldn't blame Oliver if he felt a little bit helpless within Neo right now, because they never seem able to hook it up at the right time in a way that even HWA finally did yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, HWA have the Customer Venturi power unit. I didn't get confirmation before this podcast as to why the two Venturis both retired within a lap of each other. I imagine it was power unit related, but do either of you have any news on that, or why they retired?
It just appears to be drive shaft issues across the board.
Yeah,
I believe.
So why is that Venturi unit getting so many drive shaft failures, and what do they have to work on to stop it?
I'm not particularly sure. They'll just have to look at the way they. I wouldn't say go back to the designing board, but they definitely do have to work on it, and they have to put more diligence into recognising the issues. And it won't be an easy fix, because, as we've seen throughout many racing series, when you have that certain kind of problem, it can take more than just a few races to fix, because especially if it's a recurring issue, this isn't a one-time thing. If it was only, say, Massa that had come to a halt, it probably wouldn't be seen as such a big issue, but because it appears it happened to 3 cars all within one race, that is a big alarm sign, and I expect Venturi to really work on the powertrain, investigating what went wrong.
Yeah.
I do suspect we'll get to the bottom of it.
Of course, Stoffel Van Dorn in the HWA, as you say, also had a drive shaft failure. Luckily for him, this time it was after his race had finished. It was after the checkered flag had fallen, so he still got the points for third place and got to stand on the podium. Coming back to former Next EV Neo driver and Season 1 champion Nelson Piquet, we were joking with Peter and Hazel last time about the fact that he'd gone 40 races without a win, and his environmentalist video on the beach in Sanya looking at the plastics seemed a bit like almost deliberate career suicide, in the sense that, he was doing something very anti-establishment, even though Formula E is the establishment, and, there's a corporate mentality there that you have to do what Mr. Agag wants, because that will help you to get paid at the end of the day. And I think we understand that as journalists. We understand that the best interest of the sport is not to criticise it unduly. We can still be honest about if somebody's doing a bad job somewhere, but criticising the fabric of the sport and why it's there, that doesn't really help anyone. In the same way, I felt Piquet by going outside of the message so much. He was doing something that was the right thing, but maybe something that, you know, a private citizen could do, but not someone who was working as part of Formula E. So I just wonder, how much did things like that contribute to his sacking by Jaguar, or was it completely performance related? Either of you?
To the point of the environmental video, it is definitely, to call it a touchy subject is an understatement, and there's a lot of politics behind it, but from my personal point of view, I am quite glad he did what he did, because he showed a human side to the drivers that suggests they realise some of the impact that environmental issues can cause, and that the fabric of a more sustainable, not just racing series, but sustainable future does matter to them. And although it was quite unprofessional of him to do so, I can't condemn someone who wants to try and spread the message. So I am fairly thankful he did that. But how it affects his relationship with the higher powers of Formula E and with Jaguar, I suspect it will have had some impact, because one thing I've noticed from Piquet, you can even see it from around season 2, season 3 onwards, is what I describe the chilled out rebel. He's quite laid back, but the fabric of him is anti-establishment, as far as I've been able to see, because he's a guy that does what he wants. He does what's best for him, and if it's beneficial for the team, then great. If it's not beneficial for the team, then it happens. And I suspect Jaguar wants someone more like Mitch, who can be confident, but will go with the best interests of the team and will always favour the team above himself, or at least in most cases. Nelson, on the other hand, is less of a team player, and that's definitely come to his detriment, because when you're not necessarily a team player and rather just the figurehead who does what they want, when you're winning, that's you can cope with that when you're winning. But the moment when you're losing and you fall on hard times, the respect you have within the team, or lack of it, is going to become apparent, and you're going to have less people on your side, less time to sort out your mistakes, and a less forgiving nature. And that's come back to bite him.
Yeah, and Sophie, that chilled out rebel mentality that Conrad mentioned, I completely agree. I mean, it's something that we always complain we don't get from drivers, and so it's definitely a shame to lose Nelson's influence on the sport in that way, and hopefully he'll be back in one category or another. But it's a bit like his dad, really. I mean, Nelson Piquet Sr. would do exactly the same thing, and of course, you know, as soon as he stopped being as fast, he wasn't indulged by teams in the same way. But I mean, do you feel sad that we've lost Nelson Piquet's kind of childlike sense of doing whatever he wants? And do you feel sad that we've lost that person from Formula E?
From a fan perspective, I'd say, kind of, yeah. I mean, I never really, after season 1, paid that much attention to him, because he wasn't featured so much because he was never really at the front. But I think from more of a sort of journalistic perspective, and, you know, someone who works in public relations, I think not really, because I think, like you said, once his dad started, you know, being slower, he sort of stopped caring. And I kind of get that same mentality from Piquet Jr., that just because he wasn't, you know, featuring up front on the podium, etc., he could kind of get away with doing things, and it doesn't bring a brilliant light onto himself or the team. So from that perspective, I'm not really that sad.
How much do you both feel that he was followed around by the ghost of Crashgate? You know, because there were a lot of people on Twitter and on Reddit as well who were glad he was gone because he messed up Massa's title charge in 2008, and because you know, but I mean, it's funny because you know, this is the 11th anniversary of this year of Crashgate, but it's also the 10th anniversary of something you might have heard about in rugby union, Bloodgate. So to cut a long story short, Bloodgate was when Tom Williams, who was a promising young winger at Harlequins Rugby Club at that time, got taken off and replaced by Nick Evans, a New Zealander who was a specialist kicker, and because they had a player off the field due to a blood injury, and they had their other kicker off the field as well. So. But what was wrong was that he was given a blood capsule to chew to sort of make out Tom Williams that he had a blood injury. Now, there was a really good report about this on the BBC website, basically saying that he was hung out to dry by the club. It's his reputation that suffered in the ensuing 10 years, and Harlequins, of course, is still in the Premiership. It's still considered a good club, and they've managed to purge the staff that were involved in that and sort of prove they've moved on. So, would you say Crashgate's a bit like that? It feels like Alonso, Briatore, Renault, they've all moved on and they've all had decent careers and kept their millions since then. It's Piqué who's really had the reputation suffer because of that, isn't it?
This is actually a really good thing to discuss. I mean, Crashgate is definitely very emotional, and there's a lot of things that can be said about the impact that it's had on his career, and we already know what happened with Renault, but Piqué's career, it's had definite lasting damage for a myriad of reasons. One, the fans won't get on side with him. We've seen that even in Formula E, when he's been at the peak of his powers, people have always said that he's this, he's that, he's untrustworthy, he's a character in the worst sense of the word. But also, I do feel it's going to have a lasting impact on his relationship with teams in ways that should and shouldn't be the case. One thing is that Piqué was willing to go along with breaking the rules to keep his seat and make sure that he had a strong footing within the team. Renault wanted him to do that, and he went along with it, and that suggests to potential teams that he's willing to bend rules and potentially embroil the team in certain scandals. On the flip side, as we know, in the middle of 2009, he came clean about what he'd done in retaliation to him being dropped by Renault after Hungary. And that's going to unsettle teams way into the future as well as it has in the past, because they don't want a driver who is going to bring negative publicity to the inner workings of a team, and they think it's not worth having someone like that on who their trust is going to be dented by the fact that this person, whether for the right reasons or not, brought about a really big scandal to the media attention about a large team in Formula One at the time.
Sophie, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think that the way I see it is that, drivers, teams, etc., they can move on. They can, to a degree, forget about it, but fans will never let a driver live down something as serious as that. They will hold it above their heads for the rest of their racing career.
And of course, we should probably point out for legal reasons that in a courtroom, Fernando Alonso was found to have been completely unaware of anything that happened on that day. So we've lost Nelson Piquet, and it looks like we've got Maxi Gunter back, albeit maybe temporarily, because Nasser might be back in the seat now his IMSA commitments are done. Would you guys all maybe join me in hoping that Gunter will keep that seat, or do you think that they'll put Nasser back in there and that'll be the end of it? Sophie.
I really do hope that Maxi does get that seat. I think, as I said earlier, I think it would be brilliant to have a driver who can push a little bit more, but I don't think Dragon would be the right place for him, so I'm a little bit conflicted. I hope he gets a full-time seat, just possibly not at Dragon, but honestly, you can't even tell what they're going to do. The team just seems so chaotic with what they're doing with their drivers.
Yeah. Okay, well, so moving on. I wanted to discuss a tweet, or some tweets that a couple of people had sent out yesterday after the race. Gen 2 cars are too thick for the circuits. So now that we've got Gen 2 and now the cars are quicker and now they've got that extra 50 kilowatts plus obviously attack mode and fan boost occasionally, it's not quite like that. I mean, yes, they might be 16 seconds slower than a Formula 1 car, but they're almost on a par with a Formula 3 car in terms of speed. And I just wonder if maybe Formula E should be more flexible about considering moving to short circuits of Grand Prix tracks, or if it's okay to continue with this city circuit approach and just have more red flags from now into the future. I mean, what should be the correct approach, do you think? Let's start with Conrad.
This gets me onto something that I would actually quite like to discuss, and it's about these arguments that Formula E cars should eventually not be on street circuits and that it shouldn't be within the fabric of the DNA of the sport. And one thing that generally tends to interest me is when I ask these people who tend to be F1 fans or whatever, what are some of the most exciting tracks that you see within this series? They usually say Baku or Merida Bay. And I think they're street circuits. The problem isn't that they're on street circuits, and even the Gen 2 cars, although they are wider and they are more capable, it's a matter of logistics and where they're able to hold certain races, and simply just making wider street circuits isn't an option. You've got to be able to find that these are purpose-built, but I don't think that's particularly an issue racing on street circuits, because as we've seen in a myriad of different sports, street circuits can offer up a lot of competition and a lot of variables that make the racing more interesting, and it's worked so far for Formula E. We've had a lot of close competition and a lot of close racing. The one thing I would like to see is slightly longer street circuits with a couple more turns at least, something a bit different. Not necessarily the wideness of the track, but different corners where you're able to attempt different moves. Because one thing I have noticed missing from Formula E races is they always tend to be on the inside of the circuit with overtakes. Outside moves that we might see in other series are always welcome. If there's a possibility to have a wider street circuits, then that would be great. But I'd rather focus on the length first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, one thing which I did a kind of a semi-jokey article about circuits that Formula E should consider having in the future, and it had a very Nordic-Baltic bias because of the places that I've been to recently. But I was looking at the plans to have a Formula One race in Finland, and I was thinking, but hang on, Finland is traditionally a centre-left country with environmental laws, with a social system. You know, it just seems politically to be more in line with what Formula E wants, and I believe electric cars are doing very well in Helsinki as well. So I just thought, you know, wouldn't it be great? And this is just, you know, pie in the sky thinking, because it probably won't happen, if we could go to a Finnish forest or go to, you know, Rovaniemi in Lapland or something, and have have an open road circuit there, you know, with, because simply the optics, the visuals of having Formula E cars with trees next to them, and actually having a green environment with green cars, I think that would look great. I think we're looking at Gen 3 or beyond for something like that. But I mean, Sophie, could it ever happen?
I mean, this is Formula E, and they are always trying to break the boundaries of what is, you know, of what motorsport is and where you can and can't race and all of that. And I think it everything's a possibility with this series, but like Conrad said, it's the logistics. It's finding somewhere that is safe enough, somewhere that they are legally allowed to hold a race, and, you know, making sure that there will be enough people that would want to, you know, buy tickets and come and see the race. Because at the end of the day, Formula E is, you know, a mass market. It is, you know, it's interesting, it's new, and putting it somewhere, you know, like a sort of open forest or something would be great for, you know, bringing in new people, and it'd probably be good for the series, but it's the logistics of finding somewhere that would be safe enough for it. But I think, you know, like I said, it's Formula E, anything can happen in this series, so I wouldn't put it past the organisers to start looking at something like that.
Conrad, what about it? Do you think one day we'll move away from completely city-based circuits towards something a bit more hybrid, something in the countryside, or is it of maximum importance to Formula E that it is in the population centres where people don't have to drive 60 miles with bobble hats on to get to it?
I would quite like it if there was a mix of both, but we have to see where these events are able to be held in the future and how they will be made, because you can have tracks that are very similar to street circuits just in these areas, but they would more than likely have to be either purpose-built or things would have to be re-engineered. And I do think that goes against the DNA of Formula E, which is make use of the streets and city streets that we've got already, making use of those to create great racing within urban areas and promote a new generation of more environmentally friendly motor racing. And although it is possible, I do feel like if they're having to move mountains to be able to do this, I don't think it's particularly worth it.
I felt like the world feed coverage for the Rome race yesterday did a great job of showing the outskirts of the city where the race was based. There was the problem of it not being in the really pretty part of Rome. Instead, it was in the, shall we say, more fascist-inspired part of Rome. I wonder, is there any way in which, when we're watching the racing on the track, they can improve the optics for spectators both on TV and at the track? Because I feel like there was too much high wall and too much advertising again while I was watching the racing. And, you know, is there some kind of technology they can take on? Maybe perspex walls instead of walls with advertising on that will just allow us to see the beauty of the place where they're racing. I mean, that's a question for both of you, really.
One thing that I noticed about the race is it was just really glum, so close to an assortment of buildings, the shades that were being thrown onto the circuit. It just made for a glum experience. And coming back to Baku, I think that's a really great way to do things, because as we've seen in some sections of that track, there is close buildings, but they do it a bit later in the day, or at least it seems that way, but it is weather dependent. But I feel that too much dependence on being so close to high buildings, it just makes for a worse experience, because it's not even particularly like all the buildings there were historic or important. Some of them were just plain as anything you'll see. Even within Baku, when their most boring buildings, they had a bit of character to them that the buildings in Rome especially didn't have. And I just feel like if we're going to go to these places, these historic places, we have to make more use of the scenery that is around.
Yeah, of course, Sophie, we can go to all of the most iconic locations in the world, and we can have overhead shots of incredible constructions from history, but nothing will quite match up to going through the middle of the Excel Centre, will it?
Exactly, and I think, you know, going back to what we were just saying, I had my mum watch the start of the race, and my mum's not big into motorsport, and she said that where the circuit was could have quite easily possibly passed for somewhere in England. It was almost grey. It didn't look very nice around the circuit, and I think, you know, it does just come down to wherever, you know, Formula E are allowed to, you know, stick a circuit.
Yeah, I mean, there were parts of the race when I thought, blimey, it reminds me of Warrington, which isn't really what you want from a street race in Rome, is it? But coming back to the Gen 2 cars, Conrad, it sounds like what you were saying is that you don't believe they're too powerful for street circuits. We just need to change the street circuits a little. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, about that. I just feel like we need to focus on the length first and foremost, be able to flesh more distance out of a race, and be able to incorporate more complex circuits first of all, and then we can focus on the width and where we'll hold races. I just feel like there's a lot of ideas being thrown around about how Formula E should be done in certain ways, and it's got to be more incremental than revolutionary right now.
Yeah. Big plans for Gen 3 as well, which is another 3 seasons away from this. That they've committed to going another 4 seasons with the Gen 2 cars, which is absolutely fine in my view. But a gag and some others were talking on one of the specialist Formula E websites about Gen 3 cars possibly having 60-second fast charging pit stops, which would obviously showcase EV fast charging, which is moving on a little bit every year, and is a long way from is a long way from the days when you need to spend 45 minutes charging your Leaf in the middle of the countryside. Is this a good idea, and would you both welcome the return of pit stops, Sophie?
I would welcome the return of pit stops. I thought it was just an extra bit of dimension to the race back with the Gen 1 cars, where, you know, your pit stop, your driver change could make or break the race. I like now that, you know, they can go full races without pit stops, but honestly, I would welcome them back. And for such a quick charge, I think that would be quite interesting just to see just how it would work, how you could implement that into your race and into your strategy. And I think it'll just add a completely different dimension.
Yeah, Conrad.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of refueling, and I was saddened when it left Formula One. So to have an electric equivalent in Formula E would be absolutely incredible. And also, I just feel like it adds another part of strategic jeopardy, like where we see, like when Evans missed his attack mode. If teams try and go for a shorter charge than other teams do during the race, and that could potentially cause complications, and it's just an element of drama that I feel would really benefit the series, and it creates more tactical suspense.
I'm a cricket fan, and I'm a football fan too. And what I've noticed is that like for five-a-side football, I presume like you've both got some experience of five-a-side football, but like when you play five-a-side, players go for it a lot more. You get a lot more thumping tackles. You get a lot more action happening in a small space. So it tends to be a lot more brutal than 11-a-side. 2020 cricket, because it's a much shorter match. You get a lot more bashing and smashing of the ball for sixes, and I feel like this Gen 2 era, because we've got 45-minute races with no car swaps, the drivers are going for it a lot more, and they've got more power, and so if there is a manoeuvre from a long way off to do, then drivers tend to do it. In the Gen 1 era, you tend to see people hanging back until the car changes, to try and make a strategic move on another driver. So it's possible that this Gen 3 era, I think, might bring back a bit of tactical strategy, might make it a bit more like other forms of motorsport in terms of not just being about pulling off that move here and now. It could be interesting, but certainly, I'll look into those Gen 3 changes a bit more, because I'd love to know what plans they've got for the car design as well. The Gen 2 car obviously looks great, but a little bit of chassis variation being allowed would be super. And if they could build entirely their own drivetrain on a free basis, then obviously that would bring in a lot more EV manufacturers. But also, a lot more gaps between the cars. So, yeah, something to look out for. Coming back to the present day, though, drivers were moaning about Group 1 qualifying. Lucas de Grassi started it, then Sam Bird chimed in, and then Jev and Jerome D'Ambrosio as well. And what I noticed in each of these interviews is that Nicky Shields would ask a very softball question about, what was on your cornflakes at breakfast time, and the answer would be, Group 1 qualifying sucks, doesn't it? And I just wondered if maybe they'd spoken to each other after a driver's briefing and decided, okay, we're all in Group 1, so the first time you're given a chance to do an interview, mention Group 1 qualifying. It seemed to me like they had made a tacit agreement to keep it on the agenda to maybe force the hand of Scott Elkins and the race team. But, I mean, Conrad, do you think they're being that nefarious, or was it just that they happened to come up with all the same answer to an interview question?
In the case of Lucas Di Grassi, I think he worded his arguments quite poorly and didn't give the best representation. I believe he was quite emotional about the situation, and he's talked about it a lot over this weekend and many, and it really seems to be frustrating him. But
coming in on Degrassi, sorry to interrupt. Coming in on Degrassi, I know that you're a huge fan of his from your previous writings, but I'm surprised, that he would be emotional about it. But I'm also concerned that when he inevitably becomes the next FIA president, that might mean that he abolishes Group 1 qualifying and all the exciting things we have about Formula E right now.
I do think that Lucas is right to be able to discuss it. I make no secret, I'm not a fan of his, but I do think he's allowed to discuss it. I just think he came across quite poorly in that particular weekend when he was being interviewed after the race. But most of the other drivers, I can understand where they're coming from with this. That they're racing drivers first and foremost, and they care about their competitiveness. And when you're put in Group 1 qualifying, you are at a disadvantage, because you're the ones that have to experience this first, and you become the reference point for many other people as the track evolves and generally gets better. But at the same time, this does raise quite a good question about how much the drivers really care about the show that they put on, because one thing I've seen over the past 10, 20 years is drivers always make an effort to say in interviews and show on social media that they care about the show and the sport. But that only goes so far. They're still competitive, first and foremost. They care about the championships that they want to win, first and foremost. And if Group 1 qualifying being changed, and the qualifying format being changed, allows them to be a lot more competitive, then even if it's at the detriment of Formula E, they do it. But it's really exciting for us because it mixes up the grid, and it gives lesser known drivers or drivers further down the grid an opportunity to be able to shine, and that's part of the fabric of Formula E. And I think the qualifying structure is integral to that and needs to be kept.
Yeah, Sophie, do you think it was fairer in some ways when they drew lots for qualifying, or would you keep things exactly as they are?
See, I quite liked when they drew lots for qualifying. I just think it was... There was no way that you could say that it was unfair, that you've won the race and now you have to go out first in qualifying and be everyone else's reference. You really didn't have anything to complain about because it was all due to luck. But I also kind of enjoy this qualifying format. It just gives the drivers at the back a bit more of a chance to... like Conrad said, a bit more of a chance to shine. But I don't see it going back to the old qualifying way. But then I also can't see another qualifying format that could work.
But I mean, a lot of the complaints, I would imagine, have come from F1 fans who, obviously F1 hasn't got a perfect qualifying system either, but the F1 fans would say that, drivers should be allowed on track when they want to be. The issue there being that the tracks are so small that if you get all the drivers out at the prime time, then there's not going to be room to actually get a decent lap in. I think this qualifying group system is designed to make sure that everyone gets a chance at a lap on a clear track. I think that if you positively reward doing well in the championship, then that means that the drivers doing well will just pull out further and do even better in the championship. And this is a way of just making things that bit more equal, which gives people like Maxi Gunter and Mitch Evans a chance to challenge for the top places and challenge for Super Pole occasionally. I think we saw with Van Dorn, he's not in the fastest car. They've not got the best power unit, but he was able to finish third by virtue of doing well in qualifying and by virtue of being a great qualifier as a driver. I think the system works pretty well, but I mean, is there any way that because generally when drivers get together and complain, some kind of compromise is made. Sophie, first, what compromises can we make to please the drivers while still keeping the system fairly equal, egalitarian?
This is the thing. Off of the top of my head, I can't think of anything because I know exactly what the drivers who complained would like. They'd like to go out in group 3 or 4, go out as late as possible as almost, like you said, a reward for doing well in the race, but then that gives them a bit more of an advantage and it then becomes unfair for the rest of the field. So it's finding something that most people can agree on, because as we know, no one will agree to the same thing. Everyone will agree on different things to suit them and their time in the series. But I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Conrad, have you got any ideas on how we can just give the drivers a biscuit to stop them from moaning, but not change the sport too much?
I'm not particularly sure, and to be honest, I'm not a fan of changing the qualifying format in any way. And one thing that I've learned over the years when I've seen certain attempts at different qualifying formats is when you hit on a format that works, because the fans generally enjoy the qualifying format as it is, it's best just to leave it alone. Drivers that get into Formula E, I understand wanting to listen to the drivers because that is an important part of it and there needs to be some engagement. But when you have a qualifying format that among the fans of the series is fairly popular and they enjoy the fact that it can mix up a grid, these drivers also agree to race in this series and they know that's an integral part of being able to give chances to lower down drivers. They want to be rewarded because they're winning, but it's a lottery that can benefit them as well. Look at people like Sebastian Buemi. He got to go in Group 3, and that turned out to be beneficial to him. But in seasons 1 to 3, at least, he would have been on the other end of that, and he would have been complaining about it. Whereas now that he's fallen on harder times, which can happen to any driver, you can fall just as hard as you rise in Formula E. It's beneficial to him, and I wouldn't be surprised if this happens to more drivers in the future. So I think it should be kept the same.
Right. Now, one thing that I was planning to do before the last race, because it was the halfway point in the season, but thanks to illness and other work commitments I didn't, was a half-term report. And I wonder if maybe you guys could join me in coming up with things that we enjoyed from the first half of the season and things that we'd like to see from the second half of the season. And they can be as serious or as silly as you want. My personal thing that I really enjoyed from the first half of the season was the closeness of the racing, but I also very much enjoyed the way that drivers would pile on each other WWE style in the tweets after the race. And it felt like they were very much living up to their personas. They were, creating profiles for themselves beyond the racing, and they were trying their best not to be boring. And I really enjoyed the PR side of things as well from that point of view. It feels like, as much as Lucas de Grassi is a very self-serious character who doesn't seem to take a joke, he still seems to play on his Twitter persona as the Vince McMahon style bad guy of the sport, and he seems to kind of enjoy that a little bit. And Sam Bird, Formula E are trying to turn him into a kind of wrestling style heel character, a bad guy, but I'm not sure he quite fits that, but Andre Lotterer certainly does. So I'm enjoying that sort of character creation side of things, because it makes it easier to sell to new fans if they're looking for a driver to follow and support. But guys, let's start with Sophie. What have you enjoyed in the first half of the season? What would you like to see more of in this second half?
Probably all of the on and off track banter. I think it's so interesting and just so funny to read or listen to or whatever it may be. But I think, it like you said, it's character building, but at the same time, it's bringing in fans, because, you don't get that sort of, all of that banter and jerkiness in something like Formula One, which, you'll find the drivers take themselves a little bit, a bit more seriously. But yeah, that's probably one thing I enjoy. I really want to see that carry on into, the next couple of seasons, because I think it's just so funny, and it just adds a bit more to the drivers. It shows that they are just like everyone else, and that they're not just, deadpan serious all the time.
And is there anything that you would add that maybe you haven't seen that you'd like to see?
Maybe a tiny bit more fan interaction. I think, from a PR perspective, in the first couple of seasons, the drivers specifically were always, tweeting, replying, talking to the fans, and I don't really see it happen that often now. Formula E is built mostly off of, interacting with the fans and letting the fans, know that they are an integral part of the sport, and you don't really see that now. So I think maybe a little bit more fan interaction, other than the fan boost, would be quite nice to see.
Conrad, anything you've enjoyed from the first half, and anything you'd like to see that you haven't from the second half?
The thing that I've enjoyed most in the first half, aside from the PR, which has been absolutely brilliant, is the fact that no team seems to have a firm grip, as well as any driver, on the title fight. It's like the best way for me to describe it is like a bunch of kids daring each other to stick their hand in a fire, and each of them tries to keep it in there for as long as they can, and they just can't, and they have to pull their hand out. It feels like that because all these teams seem to be able to have a position where they do really well in a race and they're about to kick on, and then something happens. BMW, we thought that they were going to kick on, the Andretti team, and then Marrakesh happened where they threw it away with the teammate crash, and then Mahindra, they had the incident in Hong Kong where they looked like they could cement an advantage, and then the incident between Bird and Lotterer in the season. It's absolutely brilliant because you can never call it. You never know who's going to be there on any given day, and they never seem to be able to cement an advantage, so it all just keeps really close. One thing I'd like to see more of is, well, apart from more of the same, I'd quite like to see some of the teams further back, like HWA and NEO, just find more consistency, because as much as Formula E is very competitive, there are one or two teams that are already really, really far behind, and I'd just love to see almost every team be able to at least get a podium under their belt.
Okay, good. Well, thank you guys so much for taking part in this podcast. It's been a lot of fun. I hope it's been a lot of fun for the audience too. Before we finish, I'd like to find out what you're both up to writing-wise and reporting-wise, and where we can find your latest work. Sophie, what are you working on right now?
At the moment, it's still just working on anything I can over at Formula Reason, be it the any pieces that come through, press releases, social media, and I should hopefully be starting some work experience with a racing driver at some point soon. So
awesome! Can you tell us which one?
Sure can do. I'm 90% sure if the budget is brought together, I'll be working with Nicholas Reeve in the either Renault Clio Cup or something else, but most likely Renault Clio Cup. Okay,
and what are you going to be doing with him?
Mostly just sort of helping him out during the weekends, almost sort of a little bit like a PA, but doing his media work, making sure he's doing good during the race weekends, doing, social media and running his website and things like that.
And will you be doing Nico Rosberg style behind the scenes YouTube videos?
I've been considering it.
Yeah. I mean, I love Nico's YouTube, but it's got to be the biggest budget Casey Neistat video ever. So if someone could do it with with lower production values. Like, I've mentioned before, I'm a big fan of Mark Priestley's channel. I think he's shown that you can just use a smartphone or a GoPro and do perfectly well. I think motor racing on YouTube is a big growing thing now, and you've got independents as well, like Chain Bear doing a fantastic job. So if you could get in there, then I'd be very happy with that. So Nicholas Reeve in the Renault Clio Cup. It's the last season for the Clio Cup, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So does he have a long-term plan, or is he going to see how the Clio Cup pans out and then check it out later?
I think it'll probably be just seeing how Clio Cup pans out, because he is sort of struggling quite a lot with the budget at the moment. It's really not a cheap series to race. Anything on the thicc package is incredibly expensive, but he's sort of starting to put a couple of 2020 plans into place and just see if he can find a more stable series to race. So, yeah.
It's quite surprising you'd say the thicc package is incredibly expensive, because I guess everything's relative, but one of the things that they sold themselves on was being easier to budget for than, say, the World Touring Car Championship or that associated package. I guess it is. It's just still very expensive.
Yeah, it's cheaper, but not cheap at all, if that makes sense. It's still expensive. All motorsport is expensive to race. It's quite rare to find a cheap series, and some of the prices that you will be looking at for, top teams in something like British touring cars, or even, Clio Cup, it's low, but it's still up there.
Okay. And you're going to the Paris Formula E race, is that right?
Yeah, I will be, yeah.
Awesome. Could we possibly, maybe you won't have time to be on the pod, but could we possibly, maybe record an audio clip with you where you talk about the atmosphere there and what it's like at the track, or something like that?
Yeah, of course. I'll be experiencing it as a fan rather than accredited media. So, yeah, I could do that.
That would be great. So, Sophie Barker on Formula E Zone. Make sure that you follow her on Twitter. Her tag is Soph on M Sport. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. And Conrad, where can we find your writing and reporting, and what are you working on right now?
You'll find my work on either eracing.net or the Pit Crew online, and mostly the work that I do, besides the race and qualifying reports and whatnot, is general opinion pieces and investigating certain trends in these series, or certain drivers, certain teams, that kind of thing. And yeah, I generally have some works out, like at least 1 or 2 a week. So on either of those 2 websites, that'll be great to check. Hopefully I'll be able to visit more races over the next year or so and be able to learn a few more paddock secrets possibly and see where that goes.
That sounds really good. And what's your most recent piece?
My most recent piece is one for the Pit Crew online, and I believe it is about Charles Leclerc and how he handled the heartbreak of his retirement in Bahrain. And I really wanted to write about that because I'm a real admirer of Charles' work ethic and personal self-introspection, let's say. He's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be the anti-Max Verstappen in so many ways. He's got that positive mental attitude, but he's also willing to say sorry to the team if he doesn't feel his lap was quite up to it. And he's exactly the kind of guy that I like to see. You know, he loves to improve, but he doesn't have this attitude of blaming others for his faults, and I think that's wonderful to see.
The most wonderful big thing about Charlie is he'll notice faults in himself that no one else would have. And when people say to him, don't be so hard on yourself, he won't listen to that. He is hard on himself, and he knows that he is, and it works for him. And I find that quite wonderful because it's just relentless that he always wants to improve, and he knows that he can take the pressure that he puts on himself.
Yeah, of course. The thing is that drivers who are hard on themselves tend to find that a dip in form is accompanied by a dip in confidence, and he does seem like a bit of a confidence player. The thing that's been in his favour so far is that he's just been much better than the other drivers he's been competing with in the junior formulae. So he's just always had that confidence. I very much hope that even in that chaotic pressure cooker atmosphere at Ferrari, he continues to get the support of the team, because he is the future of F1. And all things being well, and health and fitness going his way, he will win a world title, won't he?
Yeah. Also, just to get back to the Renault Clio Cup, one thing I've noticed over the last 2 or 3 years is Renault have been scaling back their involvement in racing series. We saw that with Formula Renault 3.5, which became Formula V8 and then went due to lack of funding. I always figured that Renault's lesser involvement in open wheel series was for series like the Clio Cup, so I'm interested to hear this kind of news.
Yeah, the Clio Cup being cut from the TOCA package roster was a big blow for lots of people, because, as you can imagine, a lot of those cars, the drivers have had them for a few years, and now they're going to have to mothball them and move to another series. Sophie, is this a sign of Renault putting all their money into F1, or is it a sign of Renault maybe cutting back their involvement entirely?
Ooh, I'm not massively sure. It could be, but I'm really not that sure. That's quite an interesting one. That might be something to do a little bit of research into.
Because I've asked this question before about Nissan, and the answer was no. Nissan are in it for the long term, because they've got Formula E. This is because they've got the best-selling EV in the world, and because they need the publicity. But Nissan and Renault, of course, are both owned by the Nissan Renault Group, which used to be run by Carlos Ghosn, who's been put in prison recently for tax fraud. So I just wonder if maybe the change of the guard at the top might be an issue there. I don't have any information, but it will be interesting to see. But it is interesting how these big changes at the top of motoring affect even the most grassroots levels of motorsport. And very much hope that the Clio Cup will be replaced by some other form of grassroots series that is relatively easy to get into.
I think it's being replaced by the Mini Challenge, which is significantly more expensive to run than Clio's is.
Why is it more expensive?
I'm not sure. I've never really looked into the series, but I know Nick was considering moving to it after he heard that Clio's was going to be leaving TOCA, and he said that the prices that teams were charging were a decent amount more than what Clio's team would charge.
Okay. Conrad, do you go to touring car races much? Do you enjoy the TOCA package?
I generally don't. I used to watch it when I was younger, those kind of series and World Touring Car Championship, but I kind of fell out of love with it when I became more into open wheel series, and it was just hard to adjust. I'm more into DTM, if anything, because it reminds me more of open wheel racing. But back to Renault and their involvement with racing series, what I think they might be doing, from what it seems, is that they're pulling series that they bankroll themselves, and instead they're young drivers, they're just moving and relocating to GP2, Formula 3, and sticking their logos on whatever car they can. It seems like the driver program is becoming a lot more linear, whereas before, Renault's driver program could have loads of different drivers in loads of different series, preferably their own. That appears to be their strategy, but maybe that's not the case.
Yeah, I've got a big soft spot for Renault as a marque generally, because for me their golden period in touring cars and F1 coincides with my favourite period of motorsports. That particular time when they were winning in F1 with Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve, and they were winning in touring cars with Alain Menu and Jason Plato. For me, they were the kings. They were the people to look up to, and I don't feel like that kind of enjoyment from motor racing at all levels has been there so much for me since then. I mean, touring cars has had its ups and downs since then. So has Formula One, but anytime I think of Renault, I think of that great period. The same thing as if I think of Honda, I think of Senna and the NSX and McLaren and all of the good stuff, basically. But okay, so thank you so much, guys, for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. I'm Stuart Garlick. You can catch me on medium.com/e_motion or at e-motion fe, e_motion fe on Twitter. This is the Talking Podcast from eMotion, and thank you very much until the next time. Goodbye.